Okay, let's go. Number 1. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, Malta. You are a construction worker in Paola, Malta. The year is 1902, and your drill has just broken through the limestone floor into something hollow below. When your crew lowers a lantern into the gap, what you see sends your foreman back to the surface immediately. Stone steps, carved walls, passages descending into the island's bedrock in perfect geometric precision. Your foreman seals the opening. He does not report it. 2 years pass before the local authorities are properly notified. When archaeologists finally arrive, they will spend the next decade understanding what is down there, and several of them will spend the rest of their careers carefully not discussing it. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a name translating roughly as underground chamber in Greek, was carved entirely from solid limestone between 3600 and 2500 BCE. It descends through 3 levels to a depth of approximately 36 feet below the current ground surface. Every inch of its roughly 5,400 square feet was excavated by hand using antler picks and stone tools, by people who left no written records and no identifiable name. UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site in 1980 and immediately began restricting access. Visitor numbers are capped at 80 per day. The site's managers will tell you this is to prevent moisture damage from human breath. They are not wrong. What they are less eager to explain is what happens to people who spend extended time inside. Temi Zamet, the Maltese archaeologist who conducted the formal excavations between 1904 and 1911, documented the recovery of approximately 7,000 human skeletal remains distributed throughout the chambers. 7,000 people. They had been placed over a period of roughly 1,100 years, arranged and rearranged across the complex's rooms. There was no evidence of plague, no mass violence, no disease cluster to explain so many individuals ending up in the same underground space over such a long period. Consider the scale. Malta's estimated total population during the hypogeum's active period ranged between 7,000 and 11,000 people. This was not a secondary burial site serving a portion of the community. For over 1,000 years, essentially every person who died on Malta ended up here. Whatever was happening in these chambers held a permanent central role in Maltese society for approximately 40 consecutive generations. Zamet published careful, thorough archaeological reports. He remained professionally active for decades afterward. When colleagues who worked alongside him described his demeanor after the excavation concluded, the word they reached for most consistently was changed. The oracle room sits at the second level. It is a small chamber, roughly 10 feet by 6 feet, with a deliberately carved niche in one wall positioned at exactly the height of a standing adult's mouth. When a voice of the right pitch speaks into that niche, the sound propagates through the entire complex. Researcher Igor Reznikov, who spent decades studying acoustic properties of prehistoric sites, measured the hypogeum's resonant frequency in the 1990s and found the oracle room sustains approximately 110 Hz. In 2014, Paolo De Bertolis of the University of Trieste confirmed that 110 Hz selectively stimulates the left hippocampus while suppressing prefrontal cortex activity. The hippocampus handles spatial processing and emotional memory. The prefrontal cortex handles rational decision-making. The oracle room was an instrument designed to engage emotional memory while disabling critical thought. The standard explanation is that the hypogeum was an ossuary combined with a ceremonial space. Mass burial sites were common across Neolithic Mediterranean cultures, and ritual specialists using impressive acoustic effects to reinforce religious authority fits a well-documented pattern. The psychological effects reported by modern visitors are attributed to low lighting, enclosed spaces, and expectation. People arrive knowing the site is supposed to feel strange. The mind obliges, but the oracle room's niche is not a natural resonance chamber produced by accidental proportions. Giulio Magli, an astrophysicist and historian of science at the Politecnico di Milano, analyzed the niche geometry in 2009 and found it functioned as a Helmholtz resonator, a device that selectively amplifies a specific frequency and attenuates everything else. Building one requires knowing precisely what frequency you intend to amplify and why. The people who carved this chamber using antler picks in 3600 BCE either achieved the luckiest acoustic accident in prehistoric history, or they understood the neurological effect of 110 Hz resonance before modern neuroscience identified it. Neither explanation is comfortable. A site that received essentially Malta's entire dead population for 1100 years held immense social power. Something significant was happening in these chambers, something involving a room engineered to alter human consciousness across 40 generations of one society. The construction workers who found this in 1902 sealed it back up for 2 years before telling anyone. The archaeologist who excavated it spent the rest of his career looking in other directions. What do you find, 36 feet below the ground in Malta, that makes even careful scientists go quiet? From the Mediterranean, we move northeast to a different kind of ancient impossibility. Because in southeastern Turkey, there is a site that should not exist at all. Number 2. Gobekli Tepe, Turkey. You are Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist from the German Archaeological Institute. The year is 1994, and you are walking a limestone ridge called Gobekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey near the Syrian border. A University of Chicago survey team visited this same ridge in 1963 and noted it as a medieval cemetery, and walked away. You pick up a flint knife from the surface, then another. Then, a carved stone fragment with deliberate geometric markings. You realize the 1963 team was wrong about what this is. As you begin to understand what you are actually standing on, your hands go still. You will spend the next 20 years of your life on this ridge, returning every excavation season until your death in 2014. In conversations with colleagues near the end of his life, Schmidt said that Gobekli Tepe had changed his understanding of what human beings are and what they were capable of being. He said it quietly, and he did not elaborate. Gobekli Tepe is dated by multiple independent radiocarbon analyses to between 9600 and 8200 BCE. At its peak, the site contained at least 200 stone pillars, arranged in roughly 20 circular enclosures. The pillars reach up to 18 feet tall and weigh between 7 and 10 tons each. They are carved in high relief with foxes, scorpions, lions, vultures, wild boars, snakes, ducks, and abstract symbols that 3 decades of analysis have not definitively decoded. Some pillars bear T-shaped tops that several researchers interpret as stylized human figures, making each circular enclosure a gathering of stone ancestors or stone gods facing inward toward a common center. The carving quality is not primitive. It is deliberate, sophisticated, and executed with a precision that assumes prior mastery of the craft. Here is the problem. Gobekli Tepe is approximately 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It predates the invention of writing by 5,500 years. It predates the earliest confirmed agricultural settlements by 500 to 1,000 years. The people who built it were, according to the prevailing historical framework at the time of discovery, hunter-gatherers with no cities, no organized labor systems, no wheels, no metal tools, and no documented draft animals suited to quarrying and erecting 200 stone pillars, weighing up to 10 tons each. The excavations revealed no permanent habitation at the site itself, no domestic cooking areas, no evidence of agriculture. What Schmidt's team found were thousands of wild animal bones and residue from large-scale beer production. Gobekli Tepe was not where people lived. It was where people gathered for something that required feeding thousands of individuals, repeatedly, over centuries. The monument existed before the civilization usually considered necessary to build it. The mainstream interpretation accepts the genuine revolution this implies. Hunter-gatherers motivated by shared belief built Gobekli Tepe before agriculture, and the demands of constructing and maintaining it may have driven the transition to settled life and farming. This idea, that religion preceded civilization rather than following from it, has genuinely reshaped how archaeologists understand human origins. Most in the field now treat it as the working model. Here's where it gets strange. Around 8000 BCE, Gobekli Tepe was deliberately buried, not abandoned, not left to weather, intentionally filled in. Thousands of tons of material, including animal bones, flint tools, and transported soil, were brought to the site and used to systematically entomb every carved pillar, every enclosure, every room. The burial was coordinated, complete, and executed with the same organizational scale that built the place originally. Schmidt found evidence of deliberate infill in every enclosure he excavated. He never produced a satisfying explanation for this in print. In later interviews, he described Gobekli Tepe as a place where the closer you looked, the less you understood. In 2017, Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh published an analysis in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, arguing that carvings on specific pillars record a comet impact around 10,900 BCE in astronomical symbology. If that reading is correct, the site was not just a religious monument, it was a memorial to a catastrophe, deliberately buried and preserved for a future civilization to find. Was something being hidden at Gobekli Tepe? Was something being contained? And why did the man who found it spend every available moment of his final 2 decades at the site saying so little about what it meant? From this ancient silence, we travel west across the Atlantic to a place where the silence was broken only by screaming. Number 3. The Sacred Cenote of Chichen Itza, Mexico. You are Edward Herbert Thompson, the United States Consul to the Yucatan Peninsula. The year is 1904, and you are standing at the rim of a natural sinkhole 197 feet across, with vertical limestone walls dropping 65 feet to green water below. The Maya call it the Cenote Sagrado, the sacred well. Spanish colonial chronicles from the 16th century describe priests throwing sacrificial offerings into its depths, and you have spent the better part of a decade convincing yourself those accounts were exaggerated. You lower a dredge bucket on a crane you have installed at the rim, and you begin pulling up the bottom of a Maya sacred site. Over the next 6 years, you will recover more than 30,000 objects. You will also spend the last 22 years of your life avoiding this place entirely, and you will never fully put into writing what the numbers told you about what happened here. The cenote at Chichen Itza is a circular sinkhole in the flat Yucatan limestone, 197 feet in diameter, its walls dropping between 65 and 80 feet to the water surface. Below the water, the bottom descends another 45 feet. The site was an active ritual location from approximately 600 CE through the Spanish conquest in the 16th century, a span of roughly 900 years of continuous use. The Maya did not regard cenotes as symbolic portals to the underworld. They understood them as physical entrances to Xibalba, the realm of the dead and the gods of death, where water appearing from underground through limestone was the actual water of the underworld, present on the surface. What you threw into the cenote went to Xibalba. The delivery was real. Thompson's dredging operations between 1904 and 1910 recovered gold, copper, jade, obsidian, pottery, textiles, rubber, incense, and wooden objects. Many objects had been deliberately broken before offering, a practice called killing an object, releasing its spiritual essence. Thompson shipped the majority of finds to Harvard's Peabody Museum, an act that generated a major diplomatic dispute when Mexico sued for their return in the 1970s. But the physical objects were not what stayed with Thompson. It was the bones, and what the bones said about proportion. Human skeletal remains from Thompson's dredging represented a minimum of 50 individuals. Subsequent Mexican government excavations conducted between 1960 and 1970 recovered hundreds more from deeper sediment. Physical anthropologists who analyzed the remains found a population profile that did not reflect a random cross-section of Maya society. A significant percentage belonged to children between the ages of 3 and 11. Many adult skulls showed blunt cranial trauma consistent with a lethal blow before entry into the water. Some wrist bones indicated restraint. This was not a place where worshippers jumped voluntarily to honor their gods. This was a place where what was brought was delivered, and the priests managing the cenote across 9 centuries brought children. The mainstream scholarly position is that the sacred cenote represents an important center of Maya pilgrimage and sacrifice, consistent with thoroughly documented Maya religious practice. Human sacrifice, including child sacrifice, was an integral component of Maya ritual life, and cenotes served as natural focal points across the Yucatan. The recovery of objects from distant regions confirms the cenote's cross-Mesoamerican significance. The skeletal evidence is consistent with multiple documented forms of Maya practice and requires no explanation beyond the established religious context. But Thompson's private correspondence with Harvard colleagues tells a different story than his publications. In letters written during the decade after the excavation, he returned repeatedly to a single question framed not as individual events, but as accumulated duration. 900 years. He wrote that the accumulated weight of deliberate human intention, concentrated in that green water, was something he found increasingly difficult to contemplate as a category of historical fact. He visited the cenote exactly twice after the excavation ended. He avoided it for the last 22 years of his life. He never published a personal account of what it had felt like to pull the bottom of the cenote into the sunlight, piece by piece, over 6 years. The question Thompson left unresolved, and that archaeologists since have framed only in academic language, is simpler and more uncomfortable than anything in the scholarly literature. The Maya believed with complete conviction that this hole was a physical entrance to the place where the dead actually went. For 900 years, generation after generation of priests and rulers found sufficient evidence that this belief was correct to keep acting on it. What did 9 centuries of true believers know about this hole in the ground that Edward Thompson, with his dredge and his Harvard credentials, chose never to fully write down? From the limestone plains of the Yucatan, we move to the Pacific, where another ancient site has been persuading people to leave and not come back for 400 years. Number 4. Nan Madol, Micronesia. You are approaching the eastern coast of the island of Pohnpei aboard the French naval corvette La Coquille, under the command of Louis Isidore Duperrey. The year is 1825. Your Pohnpeian guides, who have been helpful and conversational throughout the approach, have gone completely silent. They are not looking at the coastline. You follow their averted eyes to the tidal flats along the reef, and you understand immediately why they have gone quiet. Rising from the shallow water is a city, not a natural formation. A constructed city built on dozens of artificial islands separated by canals, assembled from enormous interlocking columns of dark basalt stone. It extends for approximately a mile across the lagoon. You ask your guides to take you closer. They sit very still and wait for you to finish looking. Nan Madol was the administrative and ceremonial capital of the Saudilur dynasty, which ruled the island of Pohnpei from approximately the 1st century CE to 1628 CE. The complex sits on the southeastern reef flat, occupying roughly 1.5 square miles of constructed island. 92 artificial islands were built atop a coral reef in 10 to 15 feet of water, using prismatic basalt columns, the kind of naturally occurring hexagonal stone formations found in famous geological sites, like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. There is no natural source for this type of basalt on Pohnpei's reef flat. The nearest quarries are on the island's northwestern coast, approximately 18 miles away, and in the interior highlands. Geologists have estimated the total mass of basalt used in Nan Madol's construction at approximately 250 million tons. Individual basalt logs weigh between 5 and 50 tons each, with some reaching 25 feet in length. Moving stones of this weight across 18 miles of open Pacific Ocean on dugout canoes, without metal tools, without documented draft animals capable of this kind of transport, is a logistical problem that modern engineers would approach with significant specialized machinery. How the builders accomplished it is genuinely unknown. The Pohnpeian oral tradition says that 2 founding sorcerers, brothers named Olisipa and Olosopa, used magic to float the stones across the water. Archaeologists note this is not an engineering specification. The city was abandoned around 1628 CE, following an invasion from a warrior named Isokelekel. After the conquest, the population of Pohnpei essentially stopped using Nan Madol for any purpose. They did not demolish it. They did not occupy it. They stopped going. The distinction that modern Pohnpeians maintain is categorical. Everywhere else on the island, you can be after dark. Nan Madol is inhabited after sunset by the spirits of the Saudilur rulers and their subjects. Every Pohnpeian guide who worked with 20th century archaeological expeditions refused to remain at the site past late afternoon. American anthropologist William Bascom, visiting in the 1950s, described his companions physically pulling him toward the boats as dusk approached, without explanation, with the urgency of absolute necessity. The standard explanation for this prohibition is historical trauma. The Saudilur rulers were, by oral account, extraordinarily oppressive, taxing the entire island's fish harvest and maintaining control through supernatural threat. When the dynasty fell, the relief was profound and lasting. The continuing avoidance reflects 1,600 years of autocratic power concentrated in a specific location. The supernatural beliefs are a natural cultural expression of that historical trauma, not evidence of anything currently present at the site. Here's where it gets strange. Spanish explorers Pedro Fernández de Queiroz and Álvaro de Mendana received reports from their Pacific Island informants in the 1590s that the ruins on Pohnpei were already considered dangerous to approach. That was more than 30 years before the Saudalir dynasty ended in 1628. The trauma of the dynasty's rule cannot explain a fear that predated its fall. Irish adventurer James O'Connell, shipwrecked on Pohnpei in 1833 and living among the islanders for several years, wrote that his Pohnpeian companions became physically unwell whenever they approached Nan Madol, and that this reaction preceded any knowledge of his presence among them. He wrote that on one occasion, he attempted to investigate the inner islands alone after dark, and was found at dawn by his companions at the outer edge of the complex, with no memory of the night and no ability to describe what he had experienced. O'Connell's account can be dismissed as the unreliable narrative of a stranded adventurer. The pre-conquest fear of the site is harder to dismiss. And 250 million tons of unexplained basalt haven't become easier to account for since 1825. No two researchers agree on how it got there. No one has excavated the submerged canal bottoms, and the people who know this place best have been declining to spend the night there for at least 400 years. From the Pacific, we travel to the heart of Central Asia, where an ancient ruler made a very specific promise about what would happen if you disturbed his sleep. Number 5. The Tomb of Timur, Samarkand, Uzbekistan. You are Mikhail Gerasimov, a Soviet physical anthropologist known for your technique of reconstructing human faces from skeletal remains. The date is June 19th, 1941. You are in the underground crypt of the Guri Amir Mausoleum in Samarkand, Soviet Uzbekistan. Soviet authorities have ordered this excavation to provide scientific documentation of Central Asian history, and you are here to open the stone sarcophagus of Timur, the 14th century conqueror known in the West as Tamerlane. Before you open the inner lid, workers report a text inscribed in the stone of the sarcophagus itself. A translator is summoned. The room goes quiet when the translation comes back. Whomever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I. You record the inscription professionally and continue your work. On June 22nd, 1941, 36 hours after you complete your examination, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa. It will be the largest military invasion in human history. Timur, whose name means iron in Turkic, lived from 1336 to 1405. He built an empire stretching from Anatolia to the borders of China. Historical estimates attribute approximately 17 million deaths to his campaigns, roughly 5% of the world's population at the time. He died of pneumonia in February 1405 while assembling an army to invade China. The Guri Amir Mausoleum in Samarkand was completed after his death and remains one of the finest examples of Islamic medieval architecture. The crypt sits below the mausoleum's main floor, and the sarcophagus bearing the inscription is still there. Gerasimov's examination confirmed historical accounts. The skeleton showed severe arthritis in the right knee and right elbow, consistent with battle injuries described in 15th century Persian chronicles, which explained the Tamerlane epithet. The body's physical characteristics matched contemporary descriptions. Approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, strongly built, reddish-brown hair. Gerasimov used the skull to produce his famous facial reconstruction. The excavation was professional, legitimate, and scientifically significant. He published his findings. The work was genuine. 3 days after the examination was completed, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa began at 3:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, with 3.8 million German and Axis troops crossing the Soviet border simultaneously along a front stretching 2,900 miles. In the first weeks, the Soviet Union sustained casualties that dwarfed Timur's worst campaigns. The interval between the opening of the sarcophagus on June 19th and 20th and the beginning of the invasion on June 22nd is 36 hours. The mainstream position is coincidence. Operation Barbarossa had been planned since December 1940. Hitler signed Directive 21 on December 18, 1940, 6 months before Gerasimov entered the crypt. The Soviet excavation and the German military timetable were entirely independent events, connected by nothing but a calendar. The funerary inscription is a standard Central Asian formula to discourage grave robbers, not a prediction. Gerasimov was a scientist. He returned to his laboratory and did science. But Gerasimov himself is on record. In a 1970 interview with Soviet journalist Viktor Orlov, published in a regional Soviet newspaper and preserved in Central Asian archives, Gerasimov acknowledged that he had thought about the timing repeatedly in the years since 1941. He was careful with his language, as Soviet scientists needed to be, but he said explicitly that the 36-hour interval between the opening of the tomb and the beginning of the invasion had never left him. He described it as a feature of his memory that he could not categorize scientifically and had therefore stopped trying to categorize. There is a second component to the story. In November 1942, Stalin reportedly ordered Timur's remains returned to the Guri Amir and reinterred with full Islamic funeral rites, at the urging of local Muslim religious authorities appealing to traditional Uzbek cultural sensibilities. The reburial was conducted on November 20th, 1942. 3 days later, Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov launched Operation Uranus, the counteroffensive that encircled the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. It became the turning point of the Eastern Front and, by most assessments, of the entire war. The timing of both events, the opening and the reburial, each followed within days by their respective military catastrophe and victory, was noted by Soviet authorities. The notation is in the historical record. No official explanation was ever provided for it. Was Gerasimov right to be unsettled? Coincidence requires only that two events share a timeline. But how many coincidences, stacked in sequence against the same inscription, against the same tomb, does the word coincidence actually account for? From Central Asia, we travel back to the ancient world, to a site that observers said surpassed the pyramids, and that then vanished from the earth completely. Number 6. The Labyrinth of Hawara, Egypt. You are Herodotus of Halicarnassus, the Greek historian who will later be called the father of history. The year is approximately 450 BCE, and you are standing at the entrance of a structure near the Fayum oasis that has made every building you have seen in Greece look like a sketch. You have seen the pyramids of Giza. You have seen the temples of Karnak and Luxor. Nothing prepared you for this. You will write, "I saw it myself, and it surpasses description." For if anyone put together the buildings of the Greeks and displayed their works, they would seem lesser in both effort and expense compared to this labyrinth. You are looking at 3,000 rooms, half above ground and half below, covering an area of approximately 1,000 feet by 800 feet. In 2,000 years, the greatest building the ancient world ever produced will have ceased to exist. Not fallen, not buried, gone, with a thoroughness that exceeds any normal explanation. The Egyptian labyrinth was built by Pharaoh Amenemhat, the third of the 12th dynasty, around 1800 BCE, adjacent to his pyramid tomb near the town of Hawara in the Fayum Depression, southwest of modern Cairo. Amenemhat III was one of the most effective administrators of the Middle Kingdom, responsible for land reclamation projects that transformed the Fayum into Egypt's most productive agricultural region. The labyrinth covered approximately 16 acres, with walls of white polished stone and a roof of carved stone slabs. Herodotus described 2 great courts and 3,000 chambers, of which 1,500 were above ground and 1,500 below. Herodotus was not the only ancient observer to record it. Strabo, the Greek geographer who visited Egypt around 25 BCE, called the labyrinth a wonder worth seeing, described its innumerable winding chambers, and noted specifically that the subterranean level was closed to visitors for religious reasons. He was permitted to see only the upper portion. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, described the labyrinth as the model from which the legendary Cretan labyrinth of Daedalus was derived, suggesting the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur was inspired by an actual structure so complex that people lost their way inside. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, described it as still partially standing. 4 independent ancient observers across 6 centuries described the same structure, and then it was gone. When British Egyptologist William Matthew Flinders Petrie excavated the site at Hawara in 1888, he found a field of stone chips covering the correct footprint. Beneath the chips were foundation trenches and architectural fragments confirming the location. But of the 3,000 rooms described by Herodotus and 4 other sources, not a single wall remained above foundation level. Every stone had been removed. The quarrying was so thorough that in some areas even the basement floors had been taken. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. Egypt has a long history of quarrying from existing monuments. Ptolemaic, Roman, and medieval Arab builders all systematically reused earlier stonework. The labyrinth's white limestone was premium material for lime production. Its enormous size made it an exceptionally rich target. The completeness of quarrying reflects the combination of high value and easy accessibility over 2,000 years. But the Egyptian landscape is full of ancient monuments quarried for centuries that still stand. The pyramid of Amenemhat III, immediately adjacent to the labyrinth site at Hawara, still rises above the plain. Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel survive in recognizable form despite centuries of quarrying. The labyrinth was 16 acres. That level of erasure, reduced to chips with no wall standing, suggests motivation beyond economics. Something drove a completeness of removal that exceeds standard quarrying patterns. Petrie also found the subterranean half. The lower-level Strabo was denied access to, for religious reasons in 25 BCE, is still there. It sits below the Fayum's water table. Petrie confirmed the chambers with test trenches in 1888 and found them flooded and inaccessible. They remain flooded today. Modern ground-penetrating radar surveys have confirmed the presence of chambers across the full footprint beneath the water table. The lower half of the labyrinth, 1,500 rooms a Roman geographer was stopped at the stairs to, has been sealed by rising groundwater for approximately 2,000 years. Dewatering them would require an engineering project comparable to a major dam construction. No institution has committed to it. What was in those 1,500 rooms that Strabo was turned away from in 25 BCE, 1,700 years after Amenemhat III built them? What authority was still maintaining the prohibition? What motivated such complete erasure of everything above the waterline that not one wall remained? And what, beneath the flooded plain at Hawara, is still there? From Egypt's most deliberately erased monument, we travel north to a site discovered by accident in a city that was ancient when Egypt was young. Number 7. The catacombs of Qam el-Shokafa, Alexandria, Egypt. You are somewhere in Alexandria, Egypt, and the year is 1900. A donkey pulling a cart has disappeared. The cart is there. The driver is there. The donkey has gone straight through the ground into a hole no one knew existed. Workers descend with lanterns to retrieve the animal. They find a circular shaft dropping approximately 100 feet into the limestone bedrock with carved stone steps spiraling around its interior wall. At the bottom, passages lead in multiple directions. The workers follow them. They are down there for a long time. When they come back up, the foreman sends the rest of the crew home. He goes to the local government office and files a report. The site is sealed. Archaeologists are summoned. When the archaeologists descend and begin moving through the passages systematically, several of them develop an acute need to describe what they found to anyone who will listen, and an equally acute inability to find the right words. The catacombs of Qam el-Shokafa, the name meaning mound of shards in Arabic from pottery fragments that accumulated at the site over centuries, were carved into the limestone bedrock of the Rhocotis district of Alexandria during the 2nd century CE. The complex remained in active use through the 4th century. It is the largest known Roman-era catacomb in Egypt. UNESCO recognized it as one of the 7 wonders of the medieval world, based on ancient references to spectacular underground tombs in the district. The structure descends through 3 levels from the base of the entrance shaft. The architecture creates a specific unease that requires patience to describe accurately. The catacombs are not Roman. They are not Egyptian. They are not Greek. They are all 3 simultaneously, in ways that should not coexist in a single space. The main tomb chamber is framed by Corinthian pillars, the Roman architectural order associated with urban refinement. The walls between those pillars are carved with Egyptian religious figures: Thoth with his ibis head, Anubis with his jackal head, the solar disk of Ra. But the Egyptian gods are wearing Roman military armor. Anubis, the guardian of the dead, is depicted in the dress of a Roman legionnaire. The solar disk sits above a doorway flanked by Greek-style architectural elements. 3 complete religious systems are present in a single room, not in separate zones or on separate walls, but merged into a single visual statement that takes several minutes of sustained attention to even begin to parse. The triclinium is the room the earliest archaeologists return to most frequently in their accounts. It is a banquet hall carved from the rock with 3 stone benches arranged for communal dining, designed for the ancient Alexandrian practice of sharing meals in the presence of the deceased, maintaining a social relationship with the dead that acknowledged their continued participation in family life. The triclinium was where the living came to eat with the dead. It seats perhaps 20 people. It is fully functional in every architectural respect. It simply happens to be 100 feet underground in a complex housing, the remains of an unknown number of people. The Hall of Caracalla, named for the Roman emperor who massacred Alexandrian citizens in 215 CE, contains the bones of an estimated 1,800 horses alongside human remains. The horses appear to have been killed and interred simultaneously in a single event. The nature of that event is not resolved by the archaeological record. 1,800 horses in one underground chamber represents an organizational effort of significant scale and specific intention. The standard explanation is that Alexandria's hybrid iconography reflects genuinely syncretic culture. The city was the most cosmopolitan in the ancient world, with large Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and Roman populations living simultaneously. The merged religious imagery reflects real philosophical synthesis occurring in Neoplatonic intellectual circles that sought to unify multiple traditions under shared metaphysical principles. Any space serving multiple communities would naturally produce hybrid expression. Here's where it gets strange. The workers who came up in 1900 and sent the foreman to the government office were not unsettled by syncretic theology. Multiple early visitors to the deepest chambers, documented in the 1901 excavation report of archaeologist Giuseppe Botti, independently described a persistent physical sensation in the lowest rooms that each characterized using the same Italian word, pieno. Full, not full of objects, not crowded. Full in the way a room with someone in it is full, as opposed to a room that is empty. Botti himself, a professional with decades of Alexandrian fieldwork behind him, wrote in his 1901 report that the catacombs were unlike any other Roman site he had worked on. He declined to specify further. The 3 religious systems that converged in this specific location chose it together to make a unified statement about death using all 3 of their vocabularies simultaneously. What statement requires 3 separate ancient religions, a dining room for ghosts, and 1,800 horses? And what did the workers feel, 100 feet below Alexandria, that sent the foreman home? From the underground spaces of Alexandria, we travel inland to the center of Turkey, where someone built an entire city 280 feet below the surface and, apparently, locked every door from the inside. Number 8. Derinkuyu, Underground City, Turkey. You are Resmi Yalçın, a farmer in the village of Derinkuyu in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey. The year is 1963, and you are renovating your home, removing an interior wall, when you find a passage behind it descending into darkness. You get a lantern. Small caves are common in this landscape. The local volcanic rock, a compressed ash stone called tuff, is soft enough to carve with hand tools, and people have been cutting small storage spaces into it for centuries. You expect a storage room. The passage connects to another, then to a chamber, then to more passages descending further. You keep going. The ceilings rise. There are rooms for sleeping, rooms sized for storing grain, rooms that appear to be stables. You keep going down. When you surface and report to the Turkish Department of Cultural Affairs, investigators will confirm that the passage behind your wall connects to a city designed to house 20,000 people across 18 levels, 280 feet below the ground, with every major connecting door sealed from the inside. Derinkuyu is the deepest known underground city in the world. The volcanic tuff of Cappadocia is both easy to carve and structurally stable under the right conditions, making it an ideal medium for large-scale subterranean construction. The city descends 18 confirmed levels to a depth of approximately 280 feet. The complex includes sleeping quarters, kitchens, wine and oil presses, stables for cattle and horses, grain storage rooms proportioned for multi-year supply, a school, a church, and a dining area capable of accommodating hundreds of people simultaneously. More than 50 ventilation shafts run from the surface to the deepest levels, providing fresh air circulation sufficient for extended human occupation. The grain storage capacity implies years of supply, not weeks. This was not engineered for short-term refuge. The scale implies formal planning. Designing a 280-foot multi-level facility with effective ventilation, separated water supply channels that could be individually sealed to prevent surface contamination, and structural supports adequate to prevent collapse across 18 excavated floors, required understanding of load distribution, airflow physics, and hydrology. Someone planned this in full before the first stone was cut. The city's capacity has been estimated at between 20,000 and 50,000 people with their livestock. It was built for extended occupation, potentially years at a time. The doors require their own consideration. Every passage connecting separate sections of the city, particularly at each level boundary, features massive circular millstone doors. These stones weigh between 500 and 1,000 pounds each. They roll on tracks, cut into the passage floor, and can be braced in the locked position by a central shaft. The locking mechanism, the shaft and its bracing point, is located on the interior side of the door only. There is no mechanism for operating these doors from the outside. Whoever was inside Derinkuyu controlled access to every level. From the outside, once those doors were rolled and braced, there was nothing you could do. You could not open them. You could not force them. The people below decided who went in and who stayed out. The mainstream explanation is that Derinkuyu served as refuge for early Christian communities under Roman persecution and later during Arab raids of the 7th through 10th centuries CE. The inside locking doors reflect obvious defensive logic. A population hiding from hostile forces needs to control access from within. The city's size and engineering reflect cumulative construction over many centuries by successive communities, adding to an original structure. The last documented occupants were Greek Orthodox Christians, who used it intermittently through the early 20th century before abandonment around 1923. But the evidence at the deepest levels tells a more troubling story than periodic short-term refuge. The lowest floors show signs consistent with extended single-period occupation rather than cyclical intermittent use. Food storage containers, personal objects, and domestic items found at levels 15 through 18 indicate continuous habitation over months or years, not the selective temporary use that shelter during raids would produce. More significantly, the city was found as it is now. Every major millstone door rolled closed from the inside at every junction. Not open, which is what you would expect from a population that waited out a threat and returned to the surface. Sealed, all of them. 18 levels down, sealed from the inside. There are two possibilities. Either the last occupants came out safely and systematically closed every door behind them on the way up, which raises the question of why you seal a refuge you have just vacated. Or they sealed themselves in at some point and did not come back out. The Turkish Department of Cultural Affairs has excavated approximately 10 of the 18 confirmed levels. The lowest levels have not been fully examined. What the archaeologists who reached level 15 found there has not been described in any public record in detail. What the sealed lower levels of Derinkuyu contained when the millstone doors were closed for the last time remains, as of today, officially unknown. From the sealed depths of Turkey, we cross the Atlantic once more, to a place where archaeologists reached the end of a sealed tunnel and found a world that someone had constructed underground as a deliberate mirror of the sky above. Number 9. The sealed tunnel of Teotihuacan, Mexico. You are Sergio Gomez Chavez, lead archaeologist at Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History. The year is 2003, and you are working beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan, the ancient city 30 miles northeast of Mexico City that flourished between 100 BCE and 550 CE and produced a civilization whose rulers have never been identified and whose written language has not been deciphered. A rainstorm has exposed a void in the bedrock below the temple's foundation. You probe it with a metal rod and find nothing beneath for several feet. You return with proper equipment and discover a tunnel entrance 46 feet below the plaza surface, sealed with deliberate rockfill, undisturbed for approximately 1,800 years. It takes 6 years to clear enough debris to enter. When you reach the terminal chambers in 2017, You will describe the site publicly as the most spectacular thing you have ever seen. In private conversation with colleagues, you will describe it as the most disturbing sight you have ever worked. The tunnel runs due north from the entrance beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, the third largest pyramid at Teotihuacan. It is 330 feet long, 14 feet wide at its maximum, and descends to a depth of 59 feet at its terminus. The tunnel was carved through basalt bedrock, and the walls and ceiling were finished with pyrite and hematite powder applied across every surface. When Gomez's team illuminated the interior with electric lights after entering in 2009, the ceiling sparkled across its full 330-foot length. The builders had coated the tunnel with minerals that reflected light like a night sky. Someone in 200 CE spent considerable effort making the inside of a sealed, permanently dark tunnel look like the sky at night, knowing no one would ever see it after sealing. The floor of the tunnel contained 50,000 individual ritual objects placed over decades before sealing around 200 CE. Jade figurines, obsidian blades, wooden objects, shells, rubber balls, pyrite mirrors, crystals, animal skins, metal objects, seeds, and bones, each category placed with clear intentionality. 3 chambers at the 59-foot deep terminus were arranged as a constructed environment with objects oriented in specific spatial relationships to each other. The liquid mercury changed the character of the site. Gomez's team found pools of liquid mercury in 3 separate locations, in slight depressions in the floor, in quantities sufficient to fill a bucket at each location. Mercury is toxic. Workers were instructed to avoid contact. Mercury does not occur naturally anywhere near Teotihuacan. The nearest natural deposits are in the Huitzuco region of Guerrero State, approximately 190 miles to the south-southwest across mountainous terrain. Moving liquid mercury 190 miles over mountain passes using pre-Columbian technology, without sealed metal containers, is a logistical challenge with no obvious solution. Someone moved it anyway and placed it in specific positions in specific chambers at the bottom of a tunnel they were about to seal permanently. Liquid mercury has been identified at only 4 pre-Columbian sites in Mesoamerica, all major ceremonial complexes. Maya sacred texts reference mercury in the context of Xibalba, the underworld. Aztec cosmological tradition associated it with the Earth's interior itself. The Teotihuacan builders appear to have been constructing the underworld, not representing it. The pyrite night sky on the ceiling, the mercury in the floor, the 50,000 objects arranged over decades, the 3 terminal chambers oriented as a constructed cosmos. The mainstream interpretation is that the tunnel represents an elite burial complex of extraordinary richness, possibly containing the remains of Teotihuacan's founding dynasty. The ritual objects, the mercury, and the cosmological construction are all consistent with Mesoamerican elite funerary practice. The ceiling around 200 CE may reflect a political transition in which new leadership buried the religious legitimacy of its predecessors. But Gomez's team found no intact royal burials in the terminal chambers. They found scattered human bones, precisely oriented jade figurines, and evidence of deliberate arrangement before sealing. The burial interpretation does not account for the absence of burials. The 50,000 objects, the mercury transported 190 miles, and the ceiling built to look like the night sky for an audience that would never exist, were not funerary decoration. They were a constructed environment, purposefully made, sealed, and left for 1,800 years for reasons that remain genuinely unknown. Why coat a ceiling to look like the night sky inside a space no one will ever see? What was the mercury intended to do, sealed in chambers that no living person would enter? And what did Gomez tell his colleagues about the terminal chambers that he chose not to put in his published reports? From the artificial underworld beneath Mexico, we return to Egypt for the last time, to a structure that sits below the oldest recorded civilization and appears to predate even that. Number 10. The Osireion at Abydos, Egypt. You are Edouard Neville, a Swiss Egyptologist from the University of Geneva. The year is 1914. And you are excavating a structure first uncovered when a team dug below the floor of Pharaoh Seti I's temple at Abydos in 1902. Seti I's temple dates to approximately 1279 BCE. It is New Kingdom, ornate, covered in painted reliefs in the elaborate style of the 19th dynasty. But as your team digs deeper below the temple's foundation, the architecture changes without warning. The carefully painted walls give way to enormous unmortared granite blocks weighing between 50 and 100 tons each. The carving stops, the color stops. The construction style shifts to something that matches the Valley Temple at Giza, which is associated with the Old Kingdom period of around 2500 to 2350 BCE. The structure you are excavating sits 50 feet below the floor of a New Kingdom temple. Seti I built his temple above it. He did not build it. He found it, and he treated it as a sacred site that predated everything he knew. The Osireion is a megalithic structure of granite and sandstone, sitting in a pit 50 feet below the temple of Seti I at Abydos, one of Egypt's oldest sacred cities. The main hall measures 100 feet by 65 feet and is surrounded on all four sides by a granite-lined channel that would have been permanently filled with groundwater, creating an island in the center of the structure. That island, surrounded by water on every side, is where the central ritual function was performed. The walls are built from unmortared granite blocks, in a style identical to the Valley Temple of Khafre and the Sphinx Temple on the Giza Plateau, both associated with the Old Kingdom. The construction method, massive blocks set without mortar in precisely fitted courses, appears at Giza, at the Osireion, and almost nowhere else in all of ancient Egyptian architecture. Here is the problem. If the Osireion was built in the same style as Old Kingdom structures at Giza, it would date to approximately 2600 to 2300 BCE, roughly 1,000 years before Seti I. But it sits below his foundation, which means his builders dug down to it, encountered it, and built their temple above and around it as a pre-existing sacred site of extraordinary importance. Seti's own inscriptions connect the Osireion to the mythological burial place of Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, the location of the first death in Egyptian cosmology. Seti was not claiming to have built the Osireion, he was claiming to have found it. Whatever it was, Egypt's most powerful 19th dynasty pharaoh built his most important temple on top of it and pointed to it as the origin point of death itself. The mainstream position is that Seti I commissioned the Osireion as deliberate architectural pastiche, choosing Old Kingdom construction style to connect his religious program with the deep past, in the same way a later building might use ancient architectural forms to invoke historical authority. The granite moat and the island are innovative New Kingdom design choices. The structure is built in a pit to create a spatial and symbolic relationship to the underworld. But there is no other example in New Kingdom Egypt of Old Kingdom construction technique being revived as stylistic pastiche. New Kingdom builders worked in painted limestone and sandstone. They did not build in massive, unmortared granite. The technique simply does not appear elsewhere in 19th dynasty architecture. Geologist Robert Schoch argued in a 1992 paper in Venture Inward that limestone casing at certain Giza structures showed weathering patterns consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall, a climate condition absent from Egypt in any recorded period. Researcher John Anthony West and others have argued the Osireion shows similar weathering at its lower levels. If correct, the structure predates not just Seti I, but the entire pharaonic period. Henri Frankfurt conducted excavations at the Osireion in the 1920s under the Egypt Exploration Society. He was one of the most rigorous Egyptologists of his generation. He published a thorough technical report. In private correspondence now held at the Griffith Institute at Oxford, Frankfurt described the Osireion as presenting a conceptual problem he had been unable to resolve satisfactorily and that he found personally disconcerting in a way he could not fully articulate. He wrote that he returned to the site repeatedly during each excavation season because there was something about it he kept failing to look at directly. The deepest portions of the Osireion felt, in his letters, like something that preceded the categories his training gave him for understanding ancient Egypt. Not a different style, not a different period, but a different premise. As though the people who built it understood death and the geography below the living world, not as belief or theology, but as a kind of memory. 10 places, 10 silences. The hypogeum, where 7,000 people moved through a room, engineered to disable rational thought, for 40 generations. Gobekli Tepe, built before civilization and deliberately buried by the people who constructed it. The sacred cenote, where 9 centuries of true believers kept delivering to a whole they understood as a physical entrance to the dead. Nan Madol, abandoned and avoided by everyone since. Timur's tomb, with its 36-hour warning. The labyrinth of Hawara, erased except for flooded chambers no one can reach. The catacombs where workers came up, unable to find the word. Derinkuyu, sealed from the inside. The Teotihuacan tunnel, sealed with liquid mercury and mineral starlight. And the Osireion, which may be older than the oldest civilization that studied it. Real places, real explorers, and in every case the same outcome. They went in, they came back out, and they went quiet. If that question hasn't left you yet, subscribe, because that's where the good part starts. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if there's an ancient site you think belongs on this list, say so.